Hey folks, quilting should never be a race. However, there are times and situations where we find ourselves in need of a quilt overnight. So I've got a great project for you beginners out there. It's an awesome basket weave, but literally folks, I've only invested an hour or so far. This project's coming together awesome. Help me finish it out right now. The beginner basket weave quilt. Are you ready? Let's get stitching. Well, welcome back to another awesome tutorial right here at So Well with yours truly, Rob Appell from Stitchin Heaven. I'm super excited to see all of you out there, and if you didn't pick up on it, yes, we are wearing the Carefree Quilter shirt today. I don't know if I've got any left over at stitchinheaven.com, but check out our website. They're awesome shirts, and we're having a blast here with all of these awesome and I'm trying to say super easy beginner quilt projects. These are quilts that are repetitive block style. These are things that can be done very simply, but can also grow into some very elaborate quilt designs. Been having a lot of fun presenting them all to you. Of course, the channel's growing like crazy. So yes, of course, please subscribe if you have not done so already. We certainly appreciate that. And like I was starting to say, this can be a very elaborate project if you look here, but I want to just focus on our basics today. The basics of the basket weave, which is generally having a couple of different colored strips, wider than our background fabric. So today the purple will be our background story. One of my tricks is having always, once we get down into our squares, is having that background on these outer edges so that when they're rotated, they're constantly framing in the basket weave. Of course, this can be done in multiple colors, but we're gonna focus on just the 3 colors today just for ease of education. But this quilt right now, like I was starting to say, I have about an hour and a half invested. It's already the perfect baby size quilt. And could you imagine how fun this would be if we did our primary colors like a red, yellow, blue, and if we used a really great black and white checkerboard, like a wonky check, as our background fabric? That would be perfect for a baby quilt. So we're gonna use a variety of sizes, and I believe that's the key to being able to see what we're doing. I'm full of coffee, I'm sorry. I have cut the 1.5 inch strips. If you're an advanced quilter, of course, you could go down to 1 or even a little bit smaller, but like I said, this is for us beginners out there. So 1.5 and then 3.25. And the reason I didn't go much larger than 3.25 is at the end of making our strip set. So we're going to build this first to get down to our squares, but you're not going to have a lot of excess. Each strip set will yield 3 entire quilt blocks, okay? So we're going to make 7 to grow this quilt out. Right now I only have 4 in use. But you can see there's not a lot of extra left over. And one of the things I will be teaching you here in just a moment is how to keep your squares looking square even if your strips are getting a little bit wonky, and that's going to happen based a little bit on the speed you're sewing. So you don't have a lot extra. I guess you could increase these up to about 3.5 if you wanted to, but please note, not all fabrics are always the same length, and I don't want you to get frustrated. This is supposed to be an easy project, so you may want to keep these 3.25, 1.5, and then of course I've got 3 different ones. I'm going to keep my brightest one in the middle. You know, quilting is a bit like parenting, folks. I had to pick and choose my battles. I didn't necessarily want both of my New Worlds prints next to each other, but I wanted my brightest in the center with a medium tone on either side, with my darks being my background. So like I said, it's like parenting. We pick and choose our battles. It looks awesome on the wall, and we can certainly read the basket weave. I am going to teach you how to cut these squares, and I have saved my most wonky, the worst constructed strip set to do that with, because I want to teach you how it's pretty dang simple. But let me show you how I started building these from the get-go, so that we can basically get started. So once you have piles and piles, like I said, 7 of everything, as we get going through here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do long strips. And if you have the habit of sewing fast, you may find that your strips are going to get wonky. If you've never seen a video of mine before, I'm going to mention right now, I sew everything from basically one side down, with the exception of this first strip, because it's just the way it starts. So I'm going to take my first strip, I'm going to make sure that it's a little longer on both sides. It just happens to be that my background fabric is a longer fabric. Don't ask me why. There's some questions I just can't answer. Then the purple background is a little bit longer by about 2 inches. Now, I was saying I sewed these fast, so check it out. When I was going, I was like at light speed, hyperspace, full throttle sewing on this wonderful handy quilter. And one of the keys to this style of sewing, folks, is I've got this edge guide up here, and so it's really helping me maintain an accurate seam allowance. But the other thing is, notice my fabric is not dragging. I'm holding my fabric up in the air, and if you're gonna sew fast, you don't want the drag of the mat. And if you're sewing at home, I really don't recommend you have your mat this close to your machine at all, because the mat is a non-slit mat. And so your fabrics will often bind or stick near the sewing machine if you're doing what I'm doing. But remember, I'm sewing like parenting, choosing my battles. So I've set my sewing room up so it's easy to teach you all on camera, but it may not be the best way for stitching as we go. Now, I know that caffeine kicked in as soon as the camera started rolling and I jumped around. I did forget to mention as I'm cleaning up my ironing station here that you're gonna most likely want a very large cutting square. So this one is 18 square. My squares are gonna turn out at 13 today. So if you could get a 15 by 15 ruler, that's wonderful. And of course, making the strips are always best with your 8.5 by 24 ruler. That's awesome. The other thing I've done today, as much as I love my wool mat, is I don't have one that's quite large enough yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just got my whole space cleared out here, and now I'm going to press at the moment into this skinny strip. Just going to press up and away from the skinny strip. And because I like all of my sewing to be in one direction, and that maximizes my fabric, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and start on this end again. Boy, am I a disaster today. What is going on in here? It must be because I know that I'm supposed to be organized. Take your other purple strip, or your other background strip for that matter. Now again, I'm just gonna lay it up here because I already know it's longer than my interior strip, my wide strip. And I'm gonna sew this on. And again, high-speed sewing. Because part of our concept here is that you really can make this entire quilt top in just a few hours. And if you really wanted to go quick, you could use pre-cut fabrics, which would be 2.5 inches wide in your strips. So then you probably would want to use a 1 inch. And with that, you might be able to add a whole extra wide strip. But I'm afraid that that might affect negatively our artistic side of this project. I like odd numbers, folks, when I'm doing artwork. So I think 3 wide strips is really fun for this. Press this out. Again, pressing into the skinny strip now. From here on out, I'm just going to press into the strip as I add on. And I hope you can see I'm really fighting with this, because that's what happened each time, because I was sewing so quick. But what I really need to do is slow down a bit. I've got a nice amount of steam here in my iron. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and press this. It's kind of like blocking. I'm just going to go ahead and let this first strip behave itself a little bit better. Now, part of this is the nature, like our hair. I guess I'm talking about all different stuff than quilting today, but if you didn't know why hair curls, it's because the different molecules in your hair are of different lengths or different strands. And so the curlier the hair, the different offset that is. So when you think about different fabrics, these are different fabrics. So it's very possible there are actually different thread counts. They're made in different factories with all kinds of different differences, right? And so it's not impossible that they're going to sew differently, and therefore we shouldn't really be sewing this fast. I wanted to play that out so you can see what I was talking about. A lot of times as beginners, see folks like myself on YouTube, TV, whatever we want to call it, and we're sewing lickety split, but we're also editing these videos in and out, folks. So I really want you to get out of the habit of trying to sew so fast. Slow it down, enjoy the process, and now just take each strip as you go and lay it on and build out all of your rows. Like I said, we're looking for 7 strip sets. We're going to get 3 blocks out of each strip set. That'll give us 21, and I'm shooting for a 5x4 layout, so we really only need 20 blocks. That means you have one extra block to account for, but you don't have much extra. So now that we're gonna start talking about cutting squares, we're gonna slow down even a bit more to make sure we're choosing the right numbers on our rulers for our accuracy. Let me just finish this strip out, and I'll show you how to cut those squares, because I already have, like I said, I think the worst possible strip that I've saved for you all to watch. Some of the rescue cutting solutions in there. So again, press after each strip, and the longer you leave your fabric on the board, the more accurate it'll come back to, right? Because remember, that fabric has memory. It goes back to the phase it was in when it was last cool. So I'm just pressing into the yellow, pressing away now from the old work, pressing into the new. And again, you can see me pulling taut on both ends. Maybe you can hear the steam. And again, you can still see there's a little bit of rippling, wrinkling happening in here, but each square is going to be separated from the big mass, and it's not going to be a problem, okay? So of course you'll finish out sewing your strips on, but let's go ahead and talk about cutting these squares down, okay? So the next thing you're going to need to know is how wide is your strip. If you use my math with a 1.5 inch background times 4 and 3 of these at 3 1/4, you should now be at 13 from here to here. So what you're going to want to do is take yourself a ruler and measure kind of the middle, keeping your line nice and square. Boom, 13, just like that, okay? Your ends might have gotten a little funky because a lot of us have a tendency to let go of our fabric at the end, and those edges just kind of splay a little bit, and so it makes it a little bit larger at the end of our block. That's a technique for another day. Maybe we'll come back to securing those corners, but for right now, we're just figuring out how wide is our strip, right? Maybe your 1/4 inch is different than my 1/4 inch, so it might be a little bit bigger or smaller, but let's get real close together. I'm gonna suggest 13. And now what I want to do is I'm going to use, like I said, this larger ruler. By having a large square, I can really manipulate what I need to here as we go. I mentioned earlier, this is probably my worst of my strips. Hopefully you can see it's good from about here to here, and then it has a wicked curve. Well, we're going to use that to our advantage, folks. So now let's go ahead and start down here on the end that we left most accurate by starting from this end, okay? So then all we're gonna do is we're gonna set our ruler, and what I'm really looking at right now is the lines within the work matched up to the lines on the ruler. That's gonna confirm that right now my patchwork is square to my cutting. Now I'm gonna go ahead and cut off to square this first edge, and I'm going to set that on the floor. Now we're going to slide down to our 13-inch mark for me, whatever yours is on your personal. And now we're going to line this straight line up here, keeping that straight line up here. And the rest of the work looks pretty darn good. And you're going to find that yourselves on your first square as well, I'm betting, right? Your first cut generally is real nice and easy because the curve or the bow hasn't started to happen that grandmother warned us would happen if we didn't sew up one way and down the other. Okay, so these are solutions. So now we're at a 13-inch square. We're going to need that, and we're going to cut all of this at one time down. But we're only cutting one strip set at a time so that we can assume accuracy by the way we cut. Watch what happens here. So now as I take my ruler and I find this straight line here, you can even see that it's already like the fabric when I cut it, right? There was a little bit of a release. Look at that, bowed out, even though I had a nice straight cut. So again, I'm just gonna capture this, and I use that word intentionally, with my straight line there, okay? And now as I come up here, I'm looking at the top, and I'm kind of putting pressure. I'm using my arm, this massive muscle, to hold down this side of the ruler so that I can lift and adjust my strip to make it look nice and square again, nice and square through all of these lines. And now I'm going to cut this second square. Notice I still have pressure down. I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think that you will assume this is square. When I pull this off, things are going to shift around maybe a little bit, right? No big deal. Now this section though, please look at this. This side over here looks like it's got off now by an inch down here. And what I found was if I now return to the other end, my most square section seems to be about here. So now what we're going to do is the same thing. We're just going to come in here and again, line up these lines nice, at least, 4, 5, 6 inches, a shaka's worth. Trim off those selvages, set those on the floor. Rotate your work so you're still cutting with your dominant hand. Okay, and now, look, it's almost square again. So now all I have to do is cheat just a little bit here, and I'm going to trim off just like this, and this piece could be saved for fun back. Like if you were going to join a few pieces of your backing fabric together, these little strips could be really fun. So I'm not setting these completely on the floor. I'm setting those on my lower shelf. Okay, now there's only one other thing I can really teach you strategically about doing our basic basket weave. And please look at this quilt here on the wall. The next key is keeping your fabrics lined up always, so that when you see here, this yellow flows through here, into here, here, into here, right? So I just need to make sure that I watch the same fabric and I keep it in the same orientation in each block, whether it's on the extreme left-hand side or in the upper portion. That's where I'm placing my darkest orange. So that's what I start looking for. So again, it's either in the upper portion or the left-hand side as I build my block units together. Okay, so then now this one here, following that rule, I'm just going to go ahead and rotate that in. Do you see? And what you may find, because you put a little bit of a encouragement into those cuts, that these may not be perfect, but they are adjustable. So this is where we're going to allow the sewing machine to ease them together by we're just going to match up our very first point, the upper corner, and we're not going to worry about anything else. Okay, we're just going to go ahead with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to set 3 or 4 stitches down, needle down to hold it. And now I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to match up the bottom corners. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of let everything now ease itself together. So I'm watching to see that I can see the lower edge of the block below. Anytime I need to adjust seam allowances, I try to. I missed that one, but watch this one. Pushing it under with my finger there. Okay, you can still see that wonderful background fabric underneath there. And then, yeah, that last seam allowance will be pointing down again from that first strip we put on and pressed. And so we'll go ahead and stitch these through. And one of the tricks is if you're in that, oh no, I got to get this quilt done for tomorrow phase, you can put 3 blocks together, right? Because then on the next end, I could either do this, right? Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should say you should be able to put 2 blocks together, and then you could play with how you finish it out. For this one, I'm getting ready to marry it on there, so we need to put 1 more block on. Let's just do that together right now, and then we'll talk about some quilting ideas. So again, and you can see that was the one I just cut a moment ago while you were all watching and I wasn't paying much attention. I've got a few pinholes from the selvage, but this project, the benefit to a little bit of the, I'm just going to say it, it's me, it's my quilt, it's a little sloppy the way I'm doing this, is it's going to machine quilt beautifully, especially in big, large, wide open machine quilting, like big circles all over the place, or even diamond quilting, or folks, you can even take and stitch in the direction of which each of those blocks are to be running, so that you really give the eye, like I like to do on tumbling blocks, the same direction of that basket weave, so that you're helping the illusion come together, of course. As we begin marrying our rows together, what I find is really important is just to make sure that we're getting this union together right here. This works so nicely because of the way that all 4 will come together, but by that background disappearing with under the basket weave, it gives a real true woven effect. If you look at the way that when fibers really weave, they kind of put a shadow and they push under each other, and that can be very effective as well. As I'm pressing these out, I continually like to press into my straight seam there, or that outer background fabric border as I go. So I'm kind of splitting the blocks, if you will. It just makes it press and iron a little bit easier, but that will allow them to nest together into the rows. So as we're preparing for this, very simply, we would just pull this off the design wall, as we love to do. And now, as you work with your rows again, folks, just don't get going so fast that you have to deploy your seam ripper. So again, I've got that dark orange in the top, dark oranges in the top, dark orange on the left, right? So this is the appropriate location. I'm just going to flip this over like this now. And I'm just kind of addressing, just letting it wiggle out. And because, like I was talking before, by having the cutting mat now, this is going to cause a little bit more drag. So notice I've kind of fluffed the whole project onto my table. And if you're sitting at your sewing machine and you're brand new at this, as your quilt gets heavier and heavier, try to keep it in your lap, but maybe you also would notice that by pushing your sewing machine a little further onto the table, like I like to do, you can let the quilt rest on the table in front of you so that it's not having so much weight as it tries to get into the sewing machine. Earlier I mentioned sloppy seams come from sewing too fast, and I believe in that, but the other is having a little bit too much weight, the distortion, right? Because fabric does have give. If it's not allowed to flow naturally through the machine, that weight of your fabric can become a bit of a bad thing for your accuracy, okay? So taking the time to constantly fluff and adjust are good strategies, whether you're a longtime quilter, a new quilter, you're going to improve your accuracy, or you're just trying to get a little more sloppy and carefree like me. Okay, then as you get your different rows going together, whoops, let's get this out of here. Let's show it off a bit. So like I was saying, I'm going to build 4 blocks across, because if they were at 13, I'm getting pretty close to 48 already. And then if I go 5 blocks down, that should put me around 60, which is a really nice size for a lap quilt as well. So the easiest way to machine quilt this would really be to use your thread, even if a matching color, maybe choose a nice orange or yellow that matches, and then just run lines, straight lines, in the direction of your wide bars or your wide fabrics, right? And that'll take the eye, like I was saying a moment ago, through the design even better. Of course, you could just go willy-nilly all over this. You could also consider each one of these sections a square, which they were, and you could do different styles of free motion quilting within them. But when I say that, like let's say you're going to use something like a pebbles, okay? So I might pebbles in this and pebbles in this, so that it shows that this and this is the same unit. And then maybe I would do like triangles in this and triangles in this to show that these are the units moving in the opposite direction. You see, we're utilizing our stitching to show the motion of the design also. Okay, so that could be a real fun one. The other thing that I might do with this is take and draw big circles at first with a friction pen or a chalk pencil or something that's going to dissolve or disappear real easily. And I might center some of those circles on some of these cross units I was talking about earlier, and then just go crazy. But when I've done that in the past, it has distracted from the illusional design that we're using with our fabric. So anyways, something to keep in mind. Once I get this machine quilted, I'll throw some of the pictures up on social media. I can't promise to have it quilted any day soon. I've already got a stack this big I've been promising to have quilted for all of you. So maybe check me out on Friday during the live streams. I'm going to be doing a little bit more free motion quilting over the next few weeks for all of you out there, as you have been requesting. I Really appreciate you following along with all of our wonderful tutorials over here. Make sure you're sharing these basic quilting tutorials with all of your new quilting friends out there. We feel so blessed to know our community is growing by leaps and bounds. Like I said before, make sure you are subscribed if you have not already done so. We really appreciate you. We'll see you for another wonderful recorded tutorial on a Wednesday real soon and Friday for a live stream. Until then, folks, please enjoy your quilting and stay well.